following program contains scenes of sexuality, violence, coarse language, and adult themes. Because it's awesome! Viewer discretion is advised. Zelda is still hunting foil balls from the last episode. Welcome to Lady Bits episode 11. I'm Leanna Kersner. Momo is watching Zelda. And the three-dimensional construct who hates no one and loves everyone, which Zelda is standing on, Glowy Box. This episode's topic is sure to trigger a lot of people. Is misogyny in games always bad? I usually avoid using the word misogyny because it just makes people freak out. But it's important to talk about the role of bad things, TM, in art, and that's a word that gets thrown around a lot, so we need to look at what misogyny actually means and doesn't mean and not be afraid of words. Oh, gee, thanks, Glowy Box. What do you mean I'm on my own here? Like many other topics we've covered on this show, the first problem with talking about any sort of misogyny is that the dictionary definition of the term isn't at all helpful. The dictionary defines misogyny as dislike of, contempt for, or ingrained prejudice against women. Let's face it, very few people hate or fear all women in all circumstances. People can love their mother and sister and still have issues with women who don't directly nurture them. What misogyny means to most researchers and other academic types who look at the topic is a unique fear and hatred of women or groups of women who defy traditional gender roles. No, really, that's what it means. I know that this isn't common knowledge, but that's what it actually means. Gender roles can refer to domestic behaviors. Women cook, clean, and take care of the kids, while men handle the finances, do repairs, and tinker with a car or motorcycle. Gender roles also apply to jobs. When most people think of a nurse, they imagine a woman. But if I say pilot, engineer, or video game developer, most people think of a man. But gender roles also apply to personality traits. Women are expected to be modest and emotional, as opposed to masculine self-confidence that lacks the squishier emotions. Except for Momo here, he's very comfortable in his masculinity. Right, Momo? Right. Women are expected to be accommodating and agreeable, while men are expected to be strong and aggressive. And men and women who don't adhere to these norms face social punishments. As Betty Davis put it, when a man gives his opinion, he's a man. When a woman gives her opinion, she's a bitch. But the flip side is that, oh, Momo doesn't like that word. Are you offended, Momo? Momo, okay, sorry. But the flip side to being labeled a bitch if you have strong opinions is that if a woman avoids sharing her opinions or just agrees with everything the men around her say, she's seen as a bimbo or an airhead or a ditz. That emotional quality that women are supposed to have works as a double-edged sword. If you're not emotional, you're a bitch. If you are emotional, you're dismissed for being emotional. What misogyny does is takes these traditional gender roles, forces men and women into them, then uses them to prove that women aren't just different, but that we're weak. While masculine expectations are restricting, unhealthy, and really unfair for men who aren't the ideal, there is a right answer. It's just often not attainable. On the other hand, because of systemic misogyny, every role for women that exists is somehow weird, lesser, or wrong. And yes, before you start yelling at me, okay, Glowy Box, you told me so. There are pockets of misandry out there where men similarly can't win no matter what they do. Yes, it works the same way. It's just limited to pockets of academia, counterculture communities, and certain lower-paying professions. And yes, it's found on a lot of geek websites, but that's covered by low-paying professions. Essentially, if a woman is subservient, she gains approval, but is gonna be limited in personal freedoms and economic opportunity. If a woman is opinionated, bossy, or heaven forbid, immodest, the world will seek to tear her down. And sure, there are the awful cases of domestic abuse, which still, as far as reported cases go, predominantly involve male abusers and female victims. But society sees that individualized form of overt misogyny as bad. There are subtler forms of this misogynistic behavior that are much more accepted. We all know a few guys who are deliberately rude to their girlfriends, break promises to them, and are habitually late for commitments. These kind of guys are serial cheaters. With their girlfriends, they're controlling, self-absorbed, and competitive. But with male friends, they're punctual, considerate, and keep their promises. Psychologists say that this dichotomy indicates misogyny. Yeah, women do it to men sometimes too. That's just not the topic here. What's commonly misunderstood about misogyny is that it's often an unconscious thing, often a result of an early life trauma involving a female figure the person trusted. This is often someone's own mother, but it can also be an abusive or negligent sister, teacher, or girlfriend. Psychologists agree that culturally reinforced misogyny can be a factor. That means when boys are taught at a young age that men naturally have power and authority over women, but the early life trauma plants a seed that it's dangerous to be vulnerable or in any way dependent where a woman is concerned. And these trust issues lead to an inability to sustain relationships with women. Since every one of these relationships with women goes bad, the misogynist sees this as proof that women are bad. The suggested solution is more affectionate, attentive parenting of boys, but this defies the stereotypes of parenting to toughen up boys, so a lot of parents are resistant to this idea, and the cycle continues. Because misogynists in most cases don't actually know that they're misogynists, they might actually believe they're pro-woman or a feminist ally. This manifests in people advocating for protective pro-woman strategies that end up keeping women in submissive or silenced positions. If you expect a man to say, suck up mean words on the internet, but think women should be protected from mean words on the internet, sorry, you're treating women as inferior in your belief that we lack toughness. If it's not okay to talk to women that way, it's not okay to talk to anyone that way. Hopefully, this more applicable definition of misogyny, the enforcement of traditional gender roles that keeps women in submissive positions relative to men, makes sense. It's a difficult concept for some people because they've been raised to believe that being uniquely nice to women is a good thing. You should be nice to people in general. You shouldn't coddle women just because we're women. Women are individuals, and different individuals want different things. So if you're not sure, just ask us what we want. Cool. Okay, let's move on to the specifics of misogyny in video games. Misogyny in video games is often that overt kind. Kidnapping, rape, and torture of women with a sexualized overtone because it's about their sex. Villains are often examples of extreme and violent misogyny. Serial killers, rapists, domestic abusers, and the like. Is this fair game? Sure, people who abuse women exist in the real world. The problem in video games and other media is that sexualized violence is overwhelmingly depicted as just committed against women, even though some researchers suspect that about 1 in 6 men has been sexually abused at one point in their lives. Because the frequency of sexual abuse is exaggerated for women and significantly downplayed for men, it stereotypes the phenomenon of sexual violence as something that only happens to women and children. This is potentially psychologically damaging to both men and women. While women live with a unique ongoing fear of sexualized violence, men who have been assaulted in this way live with the shame of being the victim of a crime that's not supposed to happen to men. Granted, some games that actually try to show anal probing, like the South Park Stick of Truth game, get censored in multiple countries, so perhaps there are good reasons why developers avoid these sorts of plots. But what does it say that games featuring the implied rape of women have gotten past the censors for years, but Randy Marsh's ass must remain sacrosanct?
You gotta be close. Come on, try again.
When uncomfortable plots, even plots involving misogyny, are handled maturely, they can help survivors of real-world abuse feel like they're not alone and even talk about their own trauma. But when it's brainless or lazy, it's just a cheap attempt to make the player, who is assumed by many game publishers to be male, feel some sort of chivalric thrill. Other milder examples of misogyny in video games are gendered slurs flung at women, calling Catwoman a bitch in the Arkham games, for instance. This is realistic dialogue. Trust me. Again, what's more odd is that none of the rank-and-file bad guys insult Batman's sexuality or masculinity in the same way. Batman, literally, a guy dressed up in a Kevlar and leather bat costume, would at least get called a furry. He'd also probably get some gay slurs flung at him in the real world, because those even happen to regularly dressed guys in multiplayer matches. In the real world, trash talk is a lot more equal opportunity than it is in your average video game. Sure, the misogynistic speech flies freely, but so do a lot of racist and homophobic epithets. In video games, the racism and homophobia are often censored out, but the misogyny remains. It's totally fair to ask why. Developers have confirmed to me that some publishers don't want to make male players uncomfortable and censor out anything they consider gay from those games, including the real-life military medic practice of plugging bullet wounds with tampons. Yeah, that actually happens. Similar consideration isn't given to female players because some publishers consider us too small a portion of the market, but how the hell is that market share supposed to grow if they don't care if their games are off-putting to women? This doesn't mean that we should ban the word bitch from video games. It just means that publishers shouldn't be applying a double standard regarding the comfort of men and women. Either offend equally or don't offend at all. My vote is for offending equally. Grant Morrison's approach to the original Arkham Asylum comic was to have the Joker using Batman's mild homophobia to mess with Batsy's head, and it was a pretty believable take. And what about sex workers? Is the presence of prostitutes instantly misogynist? No. In a game where predominantly male characters are murdering each other, women making a career off sex should hardly cause anyone to bat an eye. But because of our culture's misogynist assumptions, sex workers are unfairly attacked since it's an immodest, unchaste profession. It doesn't even make any sense in practical terms. You are playing games wherein you're shooting off people's heads. Who cares if you pay a woman to let you shoot off your head? But the examples thus far are about misogynist narrative points. Sometimes misogyny pops up in gameplay, and that's when it becomes a much bigger problem. That's the subject of this week's Lady Bit. When misogyny is only present in a game's narrative but not in the gameplay itself, players can still navigate a deliberately not nice game world and have a satisfying, thoughtful experience. But when the gameplay itself creates limitations based on traditional gender norms, players like me get thrown out of our ability to immerse in the game. Gender-biased gameplay seems unnatural or unintuitive for players, male and female alike, who don't share the idea that women are only behaving normally when they conform to traditional gender roles. This was a real challenge for me when I tried to play as a female paladin in Neverwinter Nights. My idea of lawful good and the game's idea of lawful good were not the same. The Witcher series of games takes place in the extremely bleak world of the Northern Kingdoms and centers around an interesting experiment. Unlike many RPGs where the playable character faces an existential threat and ends up profoundly influencing the game world, The Witcher experiments with action RPG mechanics surrounding a playable character who is something of a social outcast and whose impact on the world is limited. The Northern Kingdoms are a horrible place, stunted by tyrannical monarchies and the whims of various kings. Accordingly, most of the common men are boors, and these men divide women into whores you plow and then boast about it, or virtuous and notable virgins like Saskia, the Virgin of Aedirn. These misogynist norms of the world are fair game. The player is not required to agree. The Witcher games are host to a large roster of very different female characters, and some of them are some of the most interesting female characters on offer in gaming. But by CD Projekt Red's own admission, they were learning how to make AAA games while they made the Witcher series, and sometimes they screwed up the gameplay elements. Some of these mistakes forced the player into propping up the sexist cultural norms of the Northern Kingdoms because they were given no other choice by the dialogue options. In one branch of the narrative in The Witcher 2 Assassin of Kings, Geralt of Rivia meets and potentially sleeps with a female soldier named Vess. Vess survived and received fighting training because various creepy older men took a liking to her. We all know what that means. Vess had already been sexually assaulted as a teenager, possibly more than once. Vess is no mere victim, however. She's an excellent soldier, despite her apparent disregard for uniform standards or chest protection against, well, anything. Again, the mere fact that Vess shows skin isn't an issue. It's that it doesn't make any sense that she dresses that way. Various sorceresses in the game have eye-popping outfits, but they have magical abilities that shield them against attacks and keep them from popping out of said eye-popping outfits. Glamour spells were a well-established part of Witcher lore in the books. Vess doesn't use magic, and her non-standard uniform has the secondary effect of making her commander, Vernon Roche, seem like a feckless leader who can't even get his troops into properly maintained uniforms. At least not his female troops. There's nothing wrong with the decision to make Vernon Roche more than a bit of a sexist loser, but the game shouldn't force the player to back up Roche's sexism, and in at least one place, it does. Vess is once again raped, this time by a king, and Geralt and Roche find her after the attack. The king also killed all the other Blue Stripes mercenaries. Vernon Roche predictably acts like an insensitive jerk. Watch.
We'll follow the army, kill every Kedwini we meet.
That's suicide.
Plow it all. Everything I loved died in this tent.
Yep. Roche equates Vess's chastity with the lives of Roche's men, which is nonsensical since Vess's chastity was far from intact. Vess hardly avoids sex on the condition that her partner doesn't treat her any differently than a man when it comes to being a warrior. Unfortunately, in this scene, the game forces you to treat Vess differently than the men in the game. When Vess expresses a desire as a soldier to participate in her own revenge, Roche announces that he doesn't want her to get hurt again. Geralt himself teamed up with Vernon Roche after Roche spent God knows how long torturing him, so men in the kingdom are expected to just get over getting hurt. Despite the fact that the game allows Geralt to override Roche's decisions at numerous other parts of the story, it becomes something of a run-on joke. The game doesn't give Geralt, and therefore the player, the choice to override Roche and side with Vess, despite the fact that Vess is a better fighter and significantly less annoying than Roche. So the game itself forces the player to force Vess into the traditional role of a helpless victim who needs men to avenge her, destroying her identity as a soldier who is equal to every man in her unit. If the player engaged in sex with Vess, they're also forced to violate the conditions under which Vess consented to that sex, that Geralt didn't treat her any differently than a male soldier. There's no way around the fact that at this point in the game, Vess is forced into a decidedly traditional gender role, against her will and possibly the player's. The flip side of this particular forced gender performance is a phenomenon of male expendability or disposable male syndrome, but I'll deal with that more in the next episode of this show. Again, if you want to make various characters any kind of sexist, that's a valid creative choice. But when you start limiting player choice in strange ways based on gender, that creates a frustrating experience for the player because it suddenly and somewhat nonsensically disrupts player agency. This is especially bad in an RPG, where a player expects a lot of agency regarding the story. To be clear, I think that the mistakes in The Witcher 2 should not be taken as a sign that the people who make the game or the fans of the series are misogynists. The Witcher 2 had well-documented development challenges, and many players didn't even encounter this particular scene because they chose the other narrative path that avoided it completely. Game design is difficult. Mistakes happen. Other greatest hits include the fact that in the Fable series, there are greater consequences if you divorce your spouse than if you kill them. And then there's Dragon Age Inquisitions, oddly limited romance options, thanks to the many weird restrictions by race and gender. Even though Dragon Age Origins and Dragon Age 2 had fewer potential romance options overall, there were more choices for individual players because romance options were less restricted based on gender, sexuality, and race. Even though Dragon Age Origins had only 4 romance options overall, every type of playable character had 3 choices instead of the 2 Inquisition offers for everyone but a female human or elf. Female elves have the most choice of any type of Inquisitor, 4 romance options opposed to the 2 available for all male characters in Qunari and dwarf women. The romance gameplay in Inquisition is therefore racist and sexist. Unfortunately, these messed up moments in games are treated as moral failures, not design mistakes, and that's made it very difficult to talk about these topics without someone freaking out, and we end up collectively coming to decidedly wrong conclusions. And that's the subject of this episode's Versus Mode. I am the social justice warrior. Outrage, 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 outrage. And I am here to save the world and all the women in it from social injustices wherever I determine them to be, after checking my privilege and making sure that I am woke. Hark, fair maiden! At least I think you are fair. You are covered from head to toe. You are clearly oppressed. Outrage! Outrage, 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 outrage. Jesus wounds! Cultural appropriation! You couldn't have decided to dress that way yourself. You are clearly oppressed! Outrage! Outrage, 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 outrage. What happened to your clothes, woman? No one chooses to dress that way. You are clearly oppressed! Outrage! Outrage, 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 outrage. Surprise design puppets! Outrage! Triggered! Triggered! I am triggered!
Finish her! Fatality.
The moral of the story, don't bring a sword to a gunfight, Poppet. Ooh, there's clothing everywhere. Magic time! Magicking, 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 magicking. This is absurd. That lack of nuance is usually how debates about the depiction of women in video games go, but the truth is that the condemnation of female characters who are provocatively dressed perpetuates the traditional feminine gender trait of modesty. Therefore, it has its roots in misogyny. The worst patriarchies in history tended to force women to cover up so men could control female sexuality. And yeah, I know that the most popular feminist attitudes in gaming right now contain a heavy focus on the virtues of modesty, but just because something is popular doesn't make it right, even when it's an opinion held by the most popular progressive gaming websites. If women aren't given the choice to dress sexy, then we really can't choose to dress modestly either, because it's not a choice. That's how misogyny works, by forcing us into cages of respectability and appropriateness that strip us of our choices. And it's perpetuated by women as well as men. Male characters aren't held up to that scrutiny in the same way women are, because there isn't the same pressure on men to be modest. Male writers in the games press gatekeep strongly, speaking for us, about us, and over us regarding women's bodies, our morals, and our role in this hobby. They only allow women a voice if that voice agrees with their pre-existing opinions. No matter how they try to sugarcoat this, the gatekeeping in the games press perpetuates the status quo that men are the default gamers and women are perpetual guests when it comes to playing, thinking about, and writing about video games. Until women are owners and editors at gaming publications, until we're no longer answering to men who bury their misogyny behind claims of allyship, We women are going to be depicted as second-class citizens by the game's press, which consistently prefers to depict us as victims as part of an ongoing harassment narrative. Because it's way easier to see a woman as a poor, defenseless victim than it is to accept a woman who's pushing back against the slut-shaming in your game review. How dare she have an opinion? Until the game's press faces its own misogyny, it has no right to attack rank-and-file gamers because these pundits are supposed to be thought leaders, and their writing, video content, and notable omissions in both reek of insidious misogyny. Women are not all destroyers of fun who want games to change. We're just like any other gamer in that we want games to be fun for us and want to be able to say when we love a game and when we don't love a game. And when we hate a game, like I hate The Sims. I hate The Sims. Woo, almost missed that one this episode. Okay, time to get serious for a very special trophy. When I was running the Kickstarter for this series, I was contacted by a man named Julian who wanted his late wife's name, Tanya Matson Hubbard, to appear in the backers list back here instead of his. Tanya had recently passed away of an illness, and Julian was and is grieving rather acutely. Based on his story, I told them that we could do more than just a name. I asked Julian which episode Tanya would have been most interested in. He picked this one. So, this episode's trophy is dedicated to the love and respect that we collectively have for gamers, including the female ones. This trophy is based on Tanya's World of Warcraft character, Renandra, and I hope that Julian takes this as a constant reminder of the way gamers in this community take care of each other. It's through gestures like this that focus on healing instead of fighting, through a shared love of gaming, that we're going to get to a place where everyone feels accepted in gaming. Well, except the outrage warriors. They're happiest when they're miserable. Okay, Renandra, onto the shelf. So that's it for this episode, ending on a bit of a solemn note. Thanks for watching. Like what you see? Donations are appreciated and monthly Patreon backers get access to a special bonus episode. And of course, please share this episode on your social media. Next episode, we'll tackle our final official topic. Is the damsel in distress really so bad? I know, I'm a glutton for punishment. I left that one until the end. I'm Leanna Kersner. Thanks for letting me show you my lady bits.
I am the social justice warrior! Outrage! What happened to your clothes, woman? Checking my privilege, checking my privilege, checking my privilege. I am. Outrage! To save the world! Checking my privilege. Outrage! Cultural appropriation! Checking my privilege, checking my privilege, checking my privilege. You are clearly oppressed! And I am here to save the world! Outrage! What happened to your clothes, woman? Checking my privilege. You are clearly oppressed! Outrage!